Bennett Harlan stepped off his private jet expecting to sign away the ugliest piece of land his family owned. 10 acres of Iowa swamp, standing water, cattails, mud. A place every banker in Wapello County called worthless. But when he reached the auction table, his 80-year-old mother Maeve stood alone in her worn coat, refusing to sell. The neighbors laughed. His cousin called her confused. Then Maeve pulled an old ledger from her purse and said one sentence that froze Bennett in place. "Your grandfather hid the truth in that swamp before anyone knew your name." Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. But Bennett had not come home to listen. He had come home to erase the past. The jet had landed just after 9 that morning on a private strip outside Ottumwa, Iowa. It was the kind of arrival that looked wrong against the flat winter fields. A sleek white aircraft cutting through a gray sky, a black car waiting near the hangar. A man in a tailored coat stepping down onto land he had spent half his life trying to outgrow. Bennett Harlan was 52 years old now. He owned a private aviation company based in Denver. He moved rich men, executives, surgeons, musicians, and politicians across the country in aircraft that smelled of leather and polished metal. People called him successful. They called him disciplined. They called him a man who knew when to let go of dead weight. That was why he had come back. The Harlan farm was dead weight. The old farmhouse, the sagging barn, the back 40 that barely paid its own taxes, and worst of all, the swamp. 10 acres south of the main pasture. 10 acres of black water, cattail stalks, willow brush, and mud so soft a man could lose a boot in it. Bennett had hated that place even before he left Iowa. It had swallowed tools, tractor tires, fences, and 1 summer's worth of his patience. His father had called it stubborn land. His mother had called it protected ground. Bennett called it useless. Now the farm carried a debt tied to his late father's estate. The bank wanted movement. The county wanted taxes. A developer wanted the dry acreage. And a land broker from Des Moines had offered to take the swamp along with the rest, mostly as a courtesy. It should have been simple. His mother had only needed to sign. But when Bennett arrived at the county auction hall, Maeve Harlan was already standing near the folding table, clutching her purse with both hands. She looked smaller than he remembered. Her gray hair was pinned under a wool hat. Her coat was brown, old, and frayed at the cuffs. 1 button did not match the others. Around her stood men Bennett recognized in pieces. Older now, heavier, thinner. Faces from church parking lots, feed stores, and county fairs. People who had known his family back when the Harlan name meant something more than unpaid bills. Warren Pike stood beside her, speaking softly near her ear. Warren was Bennett's cousin, though he had always acted more like a manager than family. He was broad-shouldered, silver-haired, and polished in the way small-town men became when they wanted people to trust them with papers they did not read. "Maeve," Warren said, his voice gentle enough for witnesses, "this is embarrassing. Bennett came all this way. Don't make a scene." Maeve did not look at him. The auctioneer cleared his throat. The land broker checked his watch. Someone near the back whispered, not quietly enough, "She still thinks that swamp is worth something." A few people laughed. Bennett felt heat rise along the back of his neck. Not anger at them. Not yet. Embarrassment. The sharp, private kind that made him feel 20 years old again, standing in muddy boots while richer men smiled at his family's problems. He walked to his mother. "Mom." Maeve turned. For a second, her face softened. Her eyes filled with something that looked almost like relief. Then she saw the folder under his arm. The sale documents. The clean white pages meant to end 100 years of Harlan land in less than an hour. The softness disappeared. "You brought papers," she said. "I brought a solution." "No," Maeve said quietly. "You brought a surrender." The words landed harder than he expected. Bennett lowered his voice. "The bank can start foreclosure proceedings if we keep dragging this out. Dad's estate is still tangled up. The taxes are overdue. The farmhouse needs work. You can't keep fighting everyone over a swamp. It is not just a swamp," someone snorted behind them. Warren stepped in quickly. "See, this is what I've been trying to explain. She gets fixed on things. The doctor said stress can make confusion worse." Maeve's hand tightened around her purse. Bennett looked at Warren. "What doctor?" Warren hesitated only a second. "The one I took her to last spring. Just a wellness visit. Maeve looked straight at Bennett. He took me because he wanted paperwork. The room went quieter. Warren gave a tired little laugh, the kind meant to make her sound unreasonable. Aunt Maeve, please. The land broker approached with a pen. Mrs. Harlan, no one is trying to hurt you. This offer keeps the bank off your back. It lets your son settle things cleanly. Maeve looked at the pen as if it were a blade. Then she opened her purse. Bennett expected tissues, maybe an old checkbook, maybe one of the folded church bulletins she used to carry. Instead, she pulled out a ledger. It was small, black and white, marbled, with corners softened by age. A red string had been wrapped around it twice. The paper inside had yellowed. The edges were uneven, as if some pages had been handled for years and others had been taken out. Maeve held it against her chest. My father-in-law wrote in this book before most of you were born, she said. Her voice shook, but it did not break. He knew what people said about that land. He knew they laughed. They laughed when he bought it too, called it the $10 swamp, called him an old fool. Pritchard, the seed dealer near the back, chuckled. Well, Maeve, some land earns its name. This time the laughter was louder. Bennett looked down at his shoes, expensive leather on a dusty county floor. He wanted the floor to open. He wanted this done, Mom, he said, sharper than he meant to. Enough, Maeve flinched. That small movement cut through him, but Warren saw it too, and he moved fast. Bennett, this is exactly why we need to discuss competency before things get worse. She's living alone. She's hiding documents. She's refusing reasonable financial decisions. The court will understand. Maeve turned toward him slowly. For the first time that morning, her fear became something colder. You would like that, wouldn't you, Warren? His smile froze. Bennett frowned. What does that mean? Maeve looked at her son, and there was so much pain in her face that he almost looked away. It means your grandfather left a warning inside the land records, she said. And years ago someone removed the pages that explained it. The room went still. Bennett stared at the ledger. What warning? Maeve did not answer. She only held the old book tighter. And that was when Bennett noticed Warren. His cousin was no longer looking at Maeve like she was confused. He was staring at the ledger with pale, fixed eyes, like a man seeing something he had buried come back to life. For several long seconds, nobody moved. The laughter that had filled the room only moments earlier seemed to evaporate. Maeve still held the ledger against her chest. Warren stood perfectly still. Bennett watched both of them, suddenly aware that he was the only person there who had no idea what was happening. What pages? Bennett asked. Maeve looked at him. Her eyes were tired, not confused, not lost, tired. The pages that explained why your grandfather bought that land, she said quietly. The land broker shifted impatiently. Mrs. Harlan, with respect, none of this changes the sale. It changes everything. The broker sighed. Warren stepped forward before the conversation could go further. Aunt Maeve, he said gently, this isn't the place. No, she replied. That's exactly why it's the place. Bennett noticed something strange. Warren wasn't angry. He was nervous. It was subtle. A tightening around his jaw. A slight twitch in his fingers. The kind of reaction Bennett had seen countless times in business meetings when someone realized a negotiation was slipping out of their control. For the first time that morning, Bennett stopped assuming his mother was the problem. Let's go home, he said. Everyone looked at him. The sale isn't happening today. The land broker immediately protested. Bennett, we've already prepared. I said not today. The broker's face darkened. Warren opened his mouth, then closed it again. Maeve said nothing, but for a brief moment Bennett saw relief cross her face. An hour later they were driving back toward the farm. The silence inside the truck felt heavier than the winter clouds hanging over the Iowa fields. Maeve sat beside him. The ledger rested in her lap. Bennett kept glancing at it. Finally he spoke. Why didn't you tell me any of this before? Maeve stared out the window. I tried. The answer came so quickly that Bennett almost missed it. You tried? I sent letters. His hands tightened around the steering wheel. What letters? The letters I gave Warren. Bennett looked over. Maeve still wasn't looking at him. When your father got sick, when the taxes started piling up, when I found problems with the property records, I wrote to you. A cold feeling crept into Bennett's chest. I never got any letters. Maeve nodded slowly. I know. Neither of them spoke for nearly a mile. Outside, bare trees passed like dark shadows against the fields. Finally, Bennett asked the question that had been sitting between them for years. Why didn't you call me? This time, Maeve laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. You think I didn't? Bennett felt his stomach sink. The farm appeared at the end of the road. The sight shocked him more than he expected. He remembered a place that had once looked sturdy. Now the farmhouse leaned slightly. Several shingles were missing from the roof. The paint had faded. One section of gutter hung crooked. A porch step had been replaced with a concrete block. The entire property looked tired, just like his mother. Bennett parked beside the barn. For a moment he simply sat there. He had sent money, every year. Repair money, maintenance money, medical money. He had never missed a transfer, yet nothing around him looked repaired. Nothing looked maintained. Nothing looked cared for. Maeve opened her door. I'll make coffee. Bennett followed her inside. The kitchen felt colder than it should have. A portable heater buzzed near the wall. The refrigerator hummed loudly. The wallpaper was peeling in one corner. He hated how quickly guilt found him. Maeve moved slowly around the kitchen. Not weak, just older. Older than the woman he remembered. She set the ledger on the table. For several seconds neither touched it. Then Bennett sat down. Tell me about the warning. Maeve looked at the book. Her fingers rested on the cover. Your grandfather Elias believed people only see value when someone else tells them where to look. Bennett frowned. What does that mean? It means the swamp wasn't worthless. Mom, listen. The firmness in her voice surprised him. Maeve rarely interrupted anyone, especially him. She untied the faded red string around the ledger. The cover opened with a soft crackle. Inside were pages filled with neat handwriting, dates, measurements, weather notes, land sketches, plant names. The writing looked decades old. Bennett carefully turned a page, then another, and suddenly stopped. Several sheets had been cut out, not torn, not missing from age, cut out deliberately. His eyes narrowed. Who did this? Maeve shook her head. I don't know. But Bennett noticed she didn't sound convinced. She sounded cautious, like someone afraid of saying a name out loud. He continued turning pages. One entry caught his attention. North Quarter root stock. Another, marsh growth survey. Another, cattail yield. There were symbols drawn in the margins. Small circles, arrows, markers. Nothing made complete sense. Yet none of it looked like the random notes of an old farmer. It looked organized, planned, intentional. Bennett looked up. Why would anyone remove these pages? Maeve's expression darkened. Because they explained something. What? Before she could answer, headlights swept across the kitchen window. Both turned. A truck was pulling into the driveway. Warren. Maeve's face immediately hardened. Bennett stood. I'll talk to him. Outside, the air felt colder. Warren climbed out of his truck carrying a manila folder. He forced a smile. Thought I'd stop by. Why? Warren glanced toward the house. Aunt Maeve okay? She's fine. Warren shifted his weight. You know she's under a lot of stress. There it is again. What? You keep talking like she's incapable. Warren's smile faded. I'm talking like someone who cares. Bennett stared at him. For years he had trusted Warren, trusted him to keep an eye on things, trusted him to help his parents when Bennett was gone. Now he wasn't so sure. Warren handed him the folder, foreclosure notices, tax statements, bank deadlines. Bennett opened it. The numbers were ugly, past due balances, property liens, legal warnings. Real pressure, real danger. This is why we need to sell. And the swamp, what about it? You really think it's worthless? Warren laughed. It's 10 acres of mud. The answer came too fast, too practiced. Bennett watched him carefully. Then why are you so desperate to get rid of it? The question landed harder than he expected. For the first time, Warren didn't answer immediately, only a second, maybe less. But Bennett saw it, the hesitation. Then Warren smiled again, because it can't save anything. After Warren left, Bennett returned to the kitchen. Maeve was standing by the counter, holding something, an envelope, old, yellowed. Its edges were worn from years of handling. She placed it on the table between them. What's that? Bennett asked. Maeve looked at him. It was hidden inside the ledger. Bennett picked it up carefully. Across the front, in faded ink, were 4 words, for Bennett Harlan only. Underneath was a signature, Elias Harlan, and the envelope had never been opened. Bennett turned the envelope over carefully. The paper felt brittle beneath his fingers. The seal had yellowed with age, but it remained intact. No tears, no signs of tampering. Whatever Elias Harlan had wanted to say had been waiting inside that envelope for years, maybe decades. Maeve pulled out a chair and slowly sat down. I never opened it, she said. Bennett looked up. Why not? It wasn't mine. The answer came without hesitation. He stared at her for a moment. The kitchen was cold. The heater buzzed near the wall. The roof creaked softly in the evening wind. Yet suddenly Bennett felt ashamed. His mother had spent years living under financial pressure. She had watched bills pile up. She had faced foreclosure notices. And still she had respected a dead man's wishes. More than some living people respected hers. He sat down across from her. Did Dad know about this? Maeve nodded. He knew it existed. And he told me not to open it either. Bennett glanced back at the envelope. Did he know what was inside? No. The room fell quiet again. Then Bennett carefully slid a finger beneath the seal. The paper cracked. Maeve watched without speaking. Inside was a folded sheet, only one page. Bennett unfolded it. The handwriting matched the ledger. Precise, measured Elias Harlan. Bennett began reading silently. The first few lines made little sense. Observations about land, references to marsh growth, water levels, planting schedules. Then he reached a sentence that stopped him. If these pages are missing, someone already knows what Swampus is worth. Bennett read it again, slowly, then a third time. Maeve noticed his expression. What is it? He handed her the paper. She adjusted her glasses and read. Her eyes widened. For a long moment neither spoke. Finally Bennett broke the silence. Someone already knows. Maeve nodded. I've been trying to tell you that. He stood and walked toward the window. Darkness had settled over the fields. The farm looked lonely beneath the fading light. Suddenly the situation felt larger than debt, larger than taxes, larger than a swamp. If Elias had expected pages to disappear, then whatever secret those pages contained had been important enough to steal. Which meant Warren's nervous reaction at the auction wasn't random, and neither were the missing letters. The next morning Bennett woke before sunrise. The old house was silent. He made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with the ledger. Page by page he began studying it, not skimming, studying. Years of business negotiations had taught him something valuable. Patterns mattered. People lied. Paper usually didn't. The entries covered decades. Weather notes, harvest records, water depths, hand-drawn maps. Most seemed harmless. Then he noticed something strange. Certain entries appeared repeatedly. North Quarter, root stock, survey marker C. The same phrases appeared over and over, always near sections where pages were missing. Someone had not randomly removed paper. Someone had targeted specific information. Bennett photographed every page. Then he called an attorney he trusted in Des Moines. Her name was Rachel Mercer. He had known her professionally for years. Smart, careful, not easily manipulated. After listening to a summary, Rachel remained quiet for several seconds. Finally she spoke. Do not give anyone that ledger. I'm not planning to. Good. Photograph everything. Create backups. And Bennett? Yeah? If documents are missing and property debt is involved, assume this is bigger than a family disagreement. The call ended. Bennett looked back at the ledger. The knot in his stomach tightened. Around noon he drove into town. The county records office occupied an aging brick building near the courthouse square. Inside, the smell of old paper hung in the air. A clerk directed him toward archived property records. The woman behind the desk introduced herself as Marjorie Fields. She looked to be in her 70s, sharp eyes, sharp memory. The kind of person who remembered details others forgot. When Bennett mentioned the swamp, she laughed softly. Haven't heard anyone ask about that place in years. You know it? Everybody around here knows it. She disappeared into a back room. Several minutes later, she returned carrying a thick file. Dust rose from the cover. Bennett opened it. Property transfers in, tax records, survey reports, auction notices. The deeper he dug, the stranger things became. One faded document caught his eye. County auction notice, decades old. The description was short. Poor drainage, standing water, no agricultural value. Back taxes owed, land recommended for disposal. Bennett frowned. No agricultural value, the exact phrase. Yet his grandfather had spent decades documenting the property, tracking it, protecting it, building maps. That wasn't how people treated worthless land. Marjorie leaned closer. You know what's funny? What? Your grandfather wasn't the only one who wanted that property. Bennett looked up immediately. What do you mean? She pointed toward an old transfer request. Years after he bought it, another man kept trying to acquire it. Bennett's pulse quickened. Who? Marjorie adjusted her glasses. Samuel Pike. The name hit him instantly. Warren's father. His eyes narrowed. Are y'all sure? I processed one of the requests myself. Why would he want it? Marjorie shrugged. He never said. Bennett stared at the file. The room suddenly felt smaller. If Warren's father had wanted the swamp decades ago, and Warren now wanted it sold, then the conflict was older than Bennett had realized. Much older. Marjorie continued sorting papers. Then she stopped. A confused look crossed her face. She flipped through the file again, then again. What is it? Bennett asked. She frowned. There should be another document. What document? A soil survey. Bennett's heartbeat accelerated. She continued searching. Nothing. Several more minutes passed, still nothing. Finally, she looked up. It was here years ago. What kind of survey? Detailed wetland analysis. Where is it now? Marjorie's expression hardened. It was removed. Removed by who? I don't know. She lowered her voice. But official surveys don't just disappear. Silence settled between them. Bennett slowly looked down at the file. Auction notices, property records, transfer requests, missing pages, missing letters, now a missing survey. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Someone had been cleaning the trail. Not once, repeatedly, for years. Marjorie suddenly reached for another folder sitting beneath the file. Wait. She pulled out a yellow routing slip attached to the back, a forgotten piece of paperwork. Her eyes widened. Bennett. What? She turned the slip toward him. There was a signature authorizing temporary access to the missing soil survey. The signature wasn't Warren's. It wasn't Samuel Pike's. It belonged to someone Bennett knew even better, his late father, Thomas Harlan, and the access request had been filed only 6 months before Thomas died. Bennett stared at the signature for so long that Marjorie finally lowered the paper onto the desk. The name did not change. Thomas Harlan, his father, 6 months before his death. A request for access to the very survey that no longer existed. What happened after he requested it? Bennett asked. Marjorie shook her head. I don't know. The survey was checked out. Then it was returned. Returned by who? That part's missing. Bennett let out a slow breath. Another missing piece, another gap, another coincidence that wasn't beginning to feel like a coincidence at all. Marjorie studied him carefully. Your father wasn't a careless man. No, he came in here 3 times that summer. Bennett looked up. 3 times? She nodded. He kept asking questions about the swamp. His pulse quickened. What kind of questions? The same kind you're asking. The answer sat heavily between them. Bennett thanked her and left with copies of every document she could legally provide. Outside, the afternoon sky hung low and gray over the courthouse square. He sat inside his rental SUV without starting the engine. For years he had believed his father died worried about bills, about failing crops, about keeping the farm alive. Now another possibility had appeared. Maybe Thomas had died trying to uncover something, and maybe someone had worked very hard to make sure he never finished. His phone rang. Rachel Mercer. Bennett, I looked into the loan documents you sent, and they bother me. He sat straighter. How? There are too many amendments. What does that mean? It means someone kept modifying terms after the original agreement. Bennett frowned. Is that illegal? Not necessarily. The pause worried him. But it often happens when people are trying to patch problems that shouldn't exist. She continued. Get every version of every document, not summaries, originals. I will. And Bennett? Yeah. If family members were involved in managing your mother's finances, don't assume everyone was acting in her best interest. The call ended. He sat there for another minute before starting the engine. The drive back to the farm felt different. The road was the same, the fields were the same, but his understanding of the place was changing. For years he had viewed the farm as a burden his parents refused to let go of. Now it felt like a crime scene that had aged quietly. Someone had removed pages. Someone had intercepted letters. Someone had hidden a survey. Someone had benefited. The question was who and why. By the time he reached the farmhouse, dusk had settled across the property. A single light glowed in the kitchen window. Maeve was waiting. She always seemed to know when he had found something important. The coffee was already poured when he walked in. Marjorie remembered Dad. Maeve froze, but Bennett noticed. What did she say? He was investigating the swamp. Maeve lowered her eyes. I know. The answer surprised him. You knew? She nodded slowly. He stopped talking about it near the end. Why? Maeve wrapped both hands around her mug. He became frightened. Bennett felt a chill move through him. My father wasn't frightened of much. No. For a moment she seemed somewhere else, remembering. Then she looked back at him. He thought someone was watching him. Silence filled the room. The heater hummed softly. Outside, wind brushed against the side of the house. Bennett leaned forward. Who? He never said. Did he suspect Warren? Maeve hesitated. Too long. That hesitation answered enough. Bennett stood and walked toward the sink. Anger was beginning to replace confusion. Not wild anger, focused anger. The kind that demanded answers. Mom, she looked up. How much money did I send over the years? The question surprised her. I don't know. Ballpark. Maeve stared at the table. A lot. Then why is the roof leaking? Her eyes immediately dropped. That hurt more than any explanation, because she knew. She knew exactly what he was asking. Bennett rubbed his forehead. I wired money every year. I know. Repair money, I know. Medical money, I know. His voice softened. Then where did it go? Maeve looked like she wanted to say something. Several times she almost spoke, then stopped. Finally she whispered, I didn't receive all of it. The room went still. Bennett closed his eyes. Part of him had already suspected. Hearing it spoken aloud was different. When did you realize? Years ago, and you never told me. Maeve laughed sadly. I tried. The words landed harder this time, because now he believed them. The guilt settled deeper. Every successful deal, every award, every interview where he spoke about responsibility. Meanwhile, his mother had been living under a leaking roof, and he hadn't known, or worse, he hadn't looked closely enough to know. That night, Bennett couldn't sleep. Around midnight, he walked through the house. The farmhouse revealed things differently in darkness. A crack in the ceiling, a stained section of wall, an aging furnace. Small signs of neglect, small signs of money that never arrived. Near the back hallway, he noticed a narrow door partially hidden behind a coat rack. Storage. He opened it. Dust filled the air. Shelves lined the walls. Old boxes, tools, tax records, his father's things. Bennett switched on a light. He spent the next hour sorting through forgotten paperwork. Most of it was ordinary. Receipts, equipment manuals, insurance forms. Then he found a cardboard file box marked Simple and. His pulse quickened. Inside were survey maps, property tax notices, correspondence with county offices, and at the bottom, a yellow legal envelope. The flap had already been opened years ago. Inside sat several folded papers. Bennett carefully removed them. The first page contained notes in his father's handwriting, questions, names, dates, references to meetings. One sentence had been underlined twice. Do not trust verbal agreements. The second page was stranger. A rough timeline. Several entries referenced Warren, loan discussion, property review, tax restructuring, land access. Bennett sat down on the floor. His heart was pounding now. This wasn't proof. Not yet. But it was enough to show one thing. His father had been investigating something before he died. The final sheet slipped loose and landed beside him. A photograph. Old, faded, taken near the swamp. 3 men stood beside a cluster of cattails. Elias Harlan, Thomas Harlan, and a third man Bennett didn't recognize. He turned the photograph over. Words were written on the back. Just 6. If anything happens, ask Arthur. Bennett frowned. Arthur who? He searched the box again. Nothing, no last name, no address, no explanation. Only the photograph. And beneath it, tucked inside the envelope where it had nearly gone unnoticed, was a business card. The card was old, weathered, but still readable. Arthur Bell, County Soil Consultant. Retired. And written across the bottom in Thomas Harlan's handwriting were 4 chilling words. He knows about the survey. Bennett did not sleep much that night. The business card sat on the kitchen table beside the ledger, the photograph, and his father's notes. Every piece seemed connected. None of them explained enough. Arthur Bell, County Soil Consultant. Retired. He knows about the survey. The words followed Bennett into the morning. Just after sunrise, he found Arthur's address through an old county directory and drove north through rolling farmland toward a small property outside Agency, Iowa. The house was modest, white siding, green shutters, a weathered mailbox leaning slightly toward the road. An old pickup truck sat in the driveway. The place looked lived in. That gave Bennett hope. He knocked. No answer. He knocked again. As he turned away, a voice called from behind him, "You must be Thomas's boy." Bennett spun around. An elderly man stood near a shed behind the house. He moved slowly but carried himself with surprising strength. His gray beard was trimmed short. His eyes were sharp. Arthur Bell. Bennett walked toward him. "You knew my father?" Arthur studied him for several seconds before nodding. "I knew your grandfather better." The answer immediately raised more questions. Arthur invited him inside. The house smelled faintly of coffee and old books. Maps covered several walls, topographic charts, county surveys, agricultural reports. Bennett quickly understood he was sitting in the home of a man who had spent his entire life studying land. Arthur looked at the photograph Bennett had brought. A sadness crossed his face. That was taken about 15 years before Thomas died. You remember it? I remember the day. Arthur handed the photograph back. Elias wanted a record. A record of what? Arthur hesitated. The hesitation felt familiar now. Everyone seemed to stop at the same invisible line, the line where the truth started. Elias believed that swamp mattered. Bennett almost laughed. Everybody keeps saying that, because everybody keeps making the mistake of thinking he was talking about money. The room grew quiet. Arthur leaned back in his chair. Your grandfather wasn't a rich man. No, but he was patient. The old man pointed toward the photograph. Elias spent years studying that wetland. Why? Because he thought the county had misclassified it. Bennett frowned. What does that mean? Arthur reached for a folder. Inside-eyed were copies of old survey maps. He laid one across the table. The county saw a swamp. His finger moved across the paper. Elias saw something else. What? A managed ecosystem. The phrase sounded strange. Arthur continued. The cattails weren't naturally spreading the way people assumed. Bennett leaned closer. What are you saying? I'm saying your grandfather intentionally cultivated sections of that property. The words landed heavily. Not because they proved anything. Because they matched what the ledger suggested. The rootstock, the surveys, the maps. Suddenly they seemed less like random notes, more like a plan. Arthur opened another folder. Inside were photographs. Old, faded. Several showed parts of the swamp decades earlier. Wooden markers, cleared channels, sections divided by hand-built barriers. Evidence of deliberate work. Bennett stared at them. My grandfather did all this? Over many years, Arthur's expression darkened, and somebody wanted very badly for people to forget it. Bennett felt a knot form in his stomach. The same pattern again. Hide the pages. Hide the survey. Hide the history. Hide the value. Did my father know? Arthur nodded. He was getting close. The answer chilled him. Close to what? Arthur looked toward the window. For a moment he seemed older, much older. That's where things became dangerous. Dangerous. The word hung in the air, not dramatic, not exaggerated, simply dangerous. Bennett sat forward. What happened? Arthur sighed. Thomas came here several times before he died. I know. He thought someone was manipulating property records. Bennett's pulse quickened. Did he tell you who? No. The disappointment hit immediately. But Arthur wasn't finished. He wasn't certain. The old man folded his hands together. He suspected a family member. Bennett looked away. That much he had already guessed. The real question was whether Arthur knew which one. Before he could ask, Arthur stood and crossed the room. He returned carrying a metal box. The box was old. The lock had rusted. Arthur opened it carefully. Inside sat stacks of papers, survey notes, field reports, correspondence, a thin file. Elias gave me copies. Bennett stared. Copies of what? The original wetland assessment. His heart skipped. The missing survey. Arthur slowly placed the file on the table. Not the official version. What does that mean? The county version was shortened. Bennett frowned. Why? Arthur gave a humorless smile. Politics, budget decisions, land valuation disputes, small-town nonsense. And this was the complete report. Bennett carefully opened the file. Dozens of pages, handwritten observations, maps, plant surveys, hydrology notes. Everything looked authentic, everything looked important. And then he saw a familiar phrase, North Quarter root stock. His pulse jumped. The exact phrase from the missing ledger pages. Arthur noticed immediately. You've seen that before. Yes, the old man's expression changed. Not surprise, recognition, then the ledger still exists. Bennett nodded. Arthur looked relieved. Very relieved, which raised another question. Why? The two men spent another hour reviewing documents. Most of it was technical. Wetland classifications, plant inventories, historical land usage. But a pattern slowly emerged. The swamp had never been worthless. Not even on paper. Its value simply wasn't obvious. That distinction mattered. By late afternoon, Bennett finally stood to leave. He thanked Arthur and gathered his copies. At the door, Arthur stopped him. There's something else. Bennett turned. The old man looked troubled. More troubled than before. What? Arthur hesitated. For the first time all day he seemed uncertain. After Thomas died, someone came looking for these files. The room instantly felt colder. Who? I never found out. What happened? They offered money. Bennett's jaw tightened. How much? Enough that most people would have taken it. And you didn't know? Arthur's eyes hardened. They weren't interested in the land. Bennett waited. Arthur pointed toward the file Bennett was carrying. They wanted those papers. The drive back felt longer. The sun was setting by the time Bennett reached the farm. Orange light stretched across the fields. The swamp sat in the distance, quiet and motionless. For the first time, Bennett found himself looking at it differently. Not as a burden, not as an asset, as evidence. Something hidden there had frightened people for decades. Someone had spent years erasing records, and someone else had spent years preserving them. When he entered the farmhouse, Maeve was sitting at the kitchen table. The ledger lay open in front of her. She looked up immediately. You found Arthur? Bennett nodded. He had copies of the survey. Maeve closed her eyes, just for a moment, almost as if a weight had shifted. Then Bennett placed the file on the table. Something slipped loose. A folded sheet fell from between the pages. Neither of them remembered seeing it before. Maeve picked it up. The paper was much newer than the others. Not decades old, maybe 15 years. Her face drained of color the moment she unfolded it. What is it? Bennett asked. She didn't answer. Her hands began to tremble. Mom. Finally she looked up. The fear in her eyes startled him. Because it wasn't fear of losing the farm. It wasn't fear of debt. It wasn't fear of Warren. It was recognition. Slowly she handed him the page. At the bottom sat a signature. Thomas Harlan, his father. Above it was a single handwritten sentence. If anything happens to me, do not let Warren get control of the swamp. Bennett read the sentence 3 times before the words fully settled in. If anything happens to me, do not let Warren get control of the swamp. The handwriting belonged to his father. There was no doubt about that. Maeve sank slowly into a chair. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The farmhouse seemed unusually quiet. Outside, wind brushed against the windows. Somewhere in the barn, an old metal panel rattled. Bennett carefully placed the document beside the ledger. Why didn't he tell me? Maeve looked exhausted. Maybe he tried. The answer hit harder than she intended, because now every missing letter felt different. Every unanswered phone call, every year Bennett spent believing distance was the only thing separating him from home. He suddenly realized there might have been other barriers. Human ones, intentional ones. He sat across from Maeve. Did Dad ever tell you exactly what he was afraid of? She shook her head. No, but he knew something, yes. Something involving Warren. Maeve hesitated, then nodded. The admission felt enormous. Not because it proved guilt, because it confirmed fear. His father had died carrying concerns he never fully explained, and now Bennett was following the same trail. The next morning he made a decision. He stopped waiting for answers to come to him. Instead, he started building a timeline. The kitchen table disappeared beneath documents, county records, property files, tax notices, his father's notes, bank statements, loan paperwork, photographs. The ledger. Maeve watched quietly as Bennett worked. For the first time since arriving, he looked less like a visitor and more like someone fighting for the farm. Around noon, Rachel Mercer joined by video call. Bennett walked her through everything. The missing survey, Arthur Bell, the photograph, Thomas's warning. Rachel listened carefully. Then she asked one question: who benefited? Bennett frowned. What? When things don't make sense, follow the benefit. Rachel leaned closer. The missing survey, missing pages, loan modifications, missing correspondence. She paused. Who gained something from every one of those events? Bennett already knew the answer: Warren. But knowing and proving were different things. Rachel seemed to read his thoughts. Suspicion won't save your mother. I know. You need documents. The call ended with a list of records she wanted him to obtain. Bank originals, property transfer histories, medical dates. Not conclusions, evidence, real evidence. That afternoon, Bennett drove into town again. This time he headed for Farmers and Merchants Bank, the same bank his family had used for decades. Inside, the manager greeted him politely. The Harlan name still carried weight, even now, especially now that one of them arrived in expensive suits and flew private jets. The contrast bothered Bennett more than it once would have. His mother had been treated like a burden. He was treated like a VIP. The difference wasn't character, it was money. The manager reviewed the account histories Bennett requested. Most records were routine. Then something caught Bennett's attention. Several large withdrawals, years apart, always authorized through power of attorney documentation, always involving property-related expenses. The signatures appeared to belong to Maeve, but something felt wrong, the dates. He copied everything. As he prepared to leave, the manager mentioned something casually. Almost as an afterthought, Warren was very involved. Bennett stopped. How involved? He handled a lot of paperwork for your mother. The answer tightened something inside him. Did my mother come in personally? The manager frowned. Not always. That answer followed Bennett all the way back to the farm. Not always. The phrase lingered. Not proof, but another crack in the story Warren had been telling. That evening he found Maeve sitting on the porch. A blanket covered her lap. The setting sun painted the fields gold. For a few minutes they sat together without speaking. Then Bennett asked a question he should have asked years ago. Were you happy after Dad died? Maeve looked toward the horizon. The answer took a while. No, simple, honest, painful. Bennett swallowed. You should have told me things were getting bad. Maeve gave a faint smile. I didn't want to become your burden. The words broke something inside him, because he knew exactly where she learned that thinking. From him, not directly, but through years of absence. Years of money replacing conversations. Years of assuming everything was fine. He stared across the fields. I would have come. Maeve remained silent. The silence hurt because neither of them fully believed it. Not anymore. Eventually she stood and returned inside. Bennett remained on the porch alone. Darkness settled over the property. The swamp sat beyond the fields like a black shadow, quiet, waiting, almost as if it knew something the rest of them didn't. His phone buzzed, a text message, unknown number, no greeting, no name, only a single sentence. Stop digging into the survey. Bennett immediately stood, his pulse accelerated. He called the number, straight to voicemail. He tried again, disconnected. A burner phone. Nothing more. He took screenshots and forwarded everything to Rachel. Then he walked back inside. Maeve noticed his expression immediately. What happened? Bennett showed her the message. The color drained from her face. Not surprise, recognition. That scared him more. Mom, she looked away. Have you seen something like this before? The pause lasted too long. Finally she nodded. When? Years ago. Bennett froze. What do you mean? Maeve slowly crossed the room toward an old cabinet near the dining area. Her hands trembled slightly. She opened a drawer, reached inside, pulled out a small bundle tied with string. Letters. Several of them, unopened, yellowed, some newer than others, all anonymous. Bennett stared. What are these? Maeve placed them on the table. I didn't want you to find them. Why? Because I was afraid. His stomach tightened. Maeve untied the bundle. One envelope slid free. Bennett immediately noticed the postmark, the year. It was only months before Thomas died. He opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper, no signature, no return address, only one sentence typed in black ink. Tell Thomas to stop asking questions about the North Quarter before somebody gets hurt. The room fell silent. Neither of them moved. Then Bennett noticed something else. A small mark printed in the corner of the page, almost invisible, a faded company logo. His eyes narrowed. He had seen it before, not recently, years ago. On a business proposal sitting in Warren Pike's office, Bennett stared at the faded logo for several seconds. The memory came back slowly, not from Iowa, from a meeting room in Des Moines nearly 4 years earlier. Warren had been pitching a land development partnership to a group of investors. Bennett had only attended because he happened to be in town visiting his father. The proposal had gone nowhere. At the time, Bennett barely paid attention, but he remembered the logo. A green circle surrounding a stylized reed plant, Prairie Resource Holdings. He looked down at the anonymous letter again. The same symbol sat in the corner, small, faded, but unmistakable. Maeve watched his expression change. You know it? I've seen it before. His voice sounded tighter now. Where? Warren's office. Silence filled the room. Neither wanted to say what both were thinking. The next morning, Bennett called Rachel before sunrise. She listened carefully as he explained the logo. Then she surprised him. I've heard of Prairie Resource Holdings. You have? Not because they're famous. A pause. Because they buy land through intermediaries. Bennett sat upright. What kind of land? Wetlands, conservation properties, agricultural transition zones. His pulse quickened. The exact type of property nobody seemed interested in. Except they clearly were. Rachel continued. Most of what they do is legal. Most? Some complaints have surfaced over the years. What kind? Pressure tactics? The answer landed heavily. Threatening letters, aggressive purchase offers, questionable local partnerships. Nothing proven, nothing criminal, but enough to create a pattern. Bennett thanked her and ended the call. Then he did something he should have done days ago. He called Warren. His cousin answered immediately. Bennett, you busy? Not particularly. Good. Bennett stared out the kitchen window toward the distant swamp. We need to talk. An hour later, Warren arrived. This time there was no friendly smile, no performance, no concerned relative act, just caution. The two men stood in the barn while Maeve remained inside. Cold air drifted through gaps in the weathered walls, dust floated through shafts of morning light. Bennett held the anonymous letter. Recognize this logo? Warren glanced at it, only briefly. But it was enough. His eyes tightened. A fraction of a second, then it vanished. No, Bennett already knew that was a lie. You sure? Looks familiar. Another lie. The certainty surprised Bennett. For years he had trusted Warren. Now every answer felt rehearsed, every expression calculated. Were you involved with Prairie Resource Holdings? Warren laughed, a little too quickly. Is this what we're doing now? Answer the question. His cousin folded his arms. I've done consulting work for dozens of companies. So that's a yes. Warren's jaw shifted. Bennett pressed harder. Did they want the swamp? The silence lasted longer this time, long enough. The answer was there even before Warren spoke. Everybody wants something, Bennett. Not a denial, not even close. Bennett took a step forward. My father received threats. Warren's face hardened, careful. The warning came instantly, not concern, not surprise. A warning. The temperature between them seemed to drop. My father thought someone was hiding things. He spent years chasing ghosts. The response struck Bennett like a slap. Ghosts? Warren shrugged. Old men get ideas, that did it. The anger Bennett had been holding finally surfaced. Stop talking about him like that. The words echoed through the barn. For the first time, Warren looked genuinely surprised. Not because Bennett was angry, because Bennett had finally chosen a side. Warren studied him carefully, then his expression changed. The mask returned. Cool, controlled, you're making a mistake. Bennett stared back. No, I made the mistake years ago. The conversation ended there. Warren left without another word. But as his truck disappeared down the road, Bennett felt more certain than ever. Warren knew something. The problem was proving it. That afternoon, Bennett drove to another county office. This one held archived business registrations. Hours passed. Most leads went nowhere. Corporate filings, partnership agreements, property disclosures. Then he found a familiar name. Prairie Resource Holdings. The company itself wasn't remarkable. What caught his attention was a subsidiary, North Quarter Environmental Development. His stomach tightened immediately. North Quarter, the same phrase from the ledger, the same phrase from the survey, the same phrase from his father's notes. It couldn't be coincidence anymore. He copied everything. Then he called Rachel. She agreed. That's not random. No. Someone borrowed language directly from the original records. The realization changed everything. For years, Bennett had assumed people wanted the swamp because of potential value. Now another possibility emerged. Maybe they already knew exactly what was there. Maybe the swamp wasn't being pursued blindly. Maybe somebody had access to information the family lost, or had stolen. When Bennett returned to the farmhouse that evening, he found Maeve sorting old boxes near the dining room. The sight surprised him. For days she had seemed exhausted. Now she looked focused, determined. What are you doing? She held up a folder, looking. For what your father never threw away paperwork. A faint smile appeared. He drove me crazy with it. The smile faded quickly. But sometimes it helped. Together they searched old tax records, insurance papers, farm supply invoices, property maps. Hours passed. Most yielded nothing. Then Maeve opened a narrow cardboard box tucked beneath a cabinet. Inside were dozens of envelopes. Business correspondence, many addressed to Thomas. One envelope immediately stood out, not because of the sender, because it had never been opened. The postmark was dated less than a month before Thomas died. Bennett carefully removed the letter. The return address belonged to Prairie Resource Holdings. Neither spoke. Slowly he opened it. A formal offer letter. Polite, professional. The company wanted access to the swamp for environmental evaluation. Nothing shocking until he reached the final page. Attached behind the offer was a handwritten note. Not from the company. From Thomas. His father had scribbled across the margin in dark ink. Met with them today. They already knew about the rootstock. Bennett felt his pulse hammering. Maeve leaned closer. There was more. Another line. Someone inside the family told them. The room seemed to stop breathing. Neither moved, neither spoke. Then Bennett turned the page over. A name had been written on the back. Only one name, half crossed out, as if Thomas had started writing it and then stopped. War, the rest of the name had been torn away. Bennett stared at the torn name for a long time. War, nothing else remained. The edge had been ripped away years ago. Maybe intentionally, maybe not. Either way, it wasn't enough. Not legally, not publicly, not yet. Maeve sat down slowly. The strain of the past few weeks showed in every movement. "What are you thinking?" she asked quietly. Bennett folded the letter and slipped it into a document sleeve. "I'm thinking Dad knew more than we realized." Maeve nodded. He always did. The answer carried sadness, not pride. Sadness. Because Thomas had died before he could finish what he started, and now Bennett was walking the same path. The difference was that he had more help, more resources, and far more to lose. The next morning began with a phone call from Rachel. She sounded unusually serious. "I got something." Bennett immediately stepped outside. "What?" "I tracked several property transactions connected to Prairie Resource Holdings." His heartbeat quickened. "And?" "The company never purchased land directly around the swamp." "Then why are they involved?" "They used intermediaries." Rachel paused. One of those intermediaries was Warren. Bennett closed his eyes. Something concrete, not proof of fraud, but proof of involvement. "A beginning," Rachel continued. "There were consulting payments." "How much?" "Enough to matter." Bennett leaned against the porch railing. "When?" "Several years." The timing aligned perfectly with Thomas's investigation, with the missing survey, with the letters, with everything. Yet it still wasn't enough. Not for court, not for the bank, not for public exposure. He needed more. Hours later he received another call. This one came from the attorney Rachel had recommended. Margaret Sloan, practical, direct, exactly the kind of lawyer Bennett trusted. After reviewing the documents, she gave him both good news and bad news. The good news was that several records justified deeper investigation. The bad news was that proving intentional fraud would take time they might not have. The foreclosure hearing was approaching, and Warren knew it. That afternoon, Warren made his move. He arrived at the farmhouse without warning. This time he brought company, a banker and a land broker. Maeve watched from the porch as the vehicles rolled into the driveway. Her shoulders stiffened immediately. Bennett stepped outside. The confrontation started before anyone even reached the house. "We need to talk," Warren said. "No." The answer surprised everyone, including Bennett himself. For years he had avoided conflict. Not anymore. Warren's expression darkened. "This concerns the property. It concerns my mother." The banker shifted uncomfortably. The land broker remained silent. Warren tried again. "The foreclosure process won't wait forever." Bennett stepped between him and the porch. "Then you can discuss it with our attorney." The word attorney landed exactly where he wanted. For the first time, Warren looked unsettled. Only briefly, but Bennett saw it. A crack, a small one, still a crack. The meeting ended quickly. No agreement, no signatures, no progress, just frustration. As the vehicles disappeared down the road, Maeve slowly released the breath she had been holding. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes," Bennett said. "I did." For the first time in years, someone had publicly chosen her side. Not because she was weak, because she was right. That mattered, more than either of them admitted. The following day brought another development. Arthur Bell called. His voice sounded urgent. "I found something." Bennett drove to his house immediately. The old survey expert met him at the door carrying a weathered file. "I wasn't looking for this. What is it?" Arthur opened the folder. Inside sat correspondence between county officials and private consultants. Most of it was routine. One page wasn't. The document referenced a restricted environmental assessment conducted years earlier. Bennett scanned the page, then stopped. A familiar name appeared. Thomas Harlan. His father had requested access, but the request had been denied. Why? Arthur pointed lower on the page. There, a handwritten notation. Information shared through alternate source. Bennett frowned. "What does that mean?" Arthur shook his head. "I don't know, but somebody provided information outside official channels. The implications hit immediately. Someone inside the system, or someone inside the family, maybe both. The mystery was growing larger, not smaller, and every answer seemed to reveal another hidden door. That evening Bennett returned to the swamp, alone. The sun was beginning to set. Wind moved gently through the cattails. The water reflected gold and orange light. For a long time he simply stood there, looking, listening, thinking. His grandfather, his father, his mother, 3 generations connected to this place. Not because it made them rich, because they believed it mattered. He finally understood that. The realization hurt, because he had spent years believing success meant leaving places like this behind. Now he was standing in the middle of the very thing he once wanted to sell, and it felt more valuable than anything he owned. Something caught his eye. A patch of disturbed ground near one of the old marker stones. Fresh, recent. Bennett froze. The mud around it looked different, compressed, like someone had been digging. His pulse accelerated. He approached carefully. The soil was still loose, not weeks old. Days, maybe hours. Someone had been there recently. Very recently. He knelt beside the spot. Partially buried beneath roots and mud sat a small metal object, a box rust-covered, about the size of a hardcover book. His heart hammered. Carefully he pulled it free. The lid resisted at first, then opened. Inside were documents sealed inside plastic, dry, protected, preserved. His hands trembled as he removed the top folder. The first page contained survey maps. The second contained correspondence. The third stopped him cold. It was a signed statement, not from Elias, not from Thomas, from someone else, a witness. Someone who claimed to know exactly who removed pages from the ledger years ago. Bennett quickly searched for the signature, then froze, because the witness was still alive, and the name at the bottom belonged to the retired county clerk who had helped Warren process property paperwork for nearly 20 years. The statement inside the metal box changed everything. Not immediately, not dramatically, but enough. Margaret Sloane moved carefully. The retired county clerk was still alive, and before anyone made accusations, she wanted verification. Over the next 2 weeks, sworn interviews were conducted. Old records were compared. Dates were checked against archived filings. The process was slow, frustratingly slow, but the truth held together. The retired clerk admitted that decades earlier, Warren's father had approached him about land records connected to the Harlan swamp. At the time, nobody considered the property valuable. It was wet ground, cattails, mud, a place people laughed about. That made what happened easier. A few pages disappeared, a survey was shortened, files were moved, nothing obvious enough to trigger alarms. Just enough to hide information from future owners. Just enough to keep control concentrated in the right hands. When confronted with the evidence, Warren finally stopped denying everything. The meeting took place in a conference room at the bank. Margaret was there. The bank representatives were there. Maeve sat quietly beside Bennett, and Warren sat across from them. For the first time since Bennett returned home, his cousin looked tired, truly tired. The fight had caught up with him. The documents sat spread across the table. The original survey, the missing ledger references, the anonymous letters, the financial records, the consulting payments, the witness statement. One piece alone wasn't enough. Together, they painted a picture, a very ugly picture. Warren stared at the table for a long time. Then he finally spoke. "My father found Elias's ledger years before anyone else." Nobody interrupted. He believed Elias had hidden something valuable. His voice sounded hollow. He spent years trying to figure out what. Maeve closed her eyes, not in surprise, in disappointment. Warren continued. When he realized the swamp might become valuable someday, he stopped caring about the family. The room remained silent. He hid pages, his shoulders sagged. He told me it was protecting our future. Bennett almost laughed at the irony. Protecting, that word had caused so much damage. Warren looked at Maeve. For the first time, guilt appeared, real guilt, not self-pity, not fear. Guilt. I should have stopped it. Maeve said nothing. Warren lowered his eyes, but I didn't. The foreclosure process was suspended soon afterward, not because someone waved a magic wand, because the bank now had legitimate concerns regarding the collateral history and loan documentation. Margaret filed challenges. Additional reviews began. The fraudulent portions of the debt would take time to untangle. But the immediate threat was gone. That mattered. For the first time in years, Maeve wasn't one signature away from losing everything. Warren faced consequences too. The consulting relationships disappeared almost overnight. Several business partners distanced themselves. Investigations into the paperwork followed. Nothing happened instantly. Nothing cinematic. But control slipped through his fingers. The one thing he had spent years trying to keep. And perhaps that hurt him most. A month later, the county held a public meeting regarding the future of the property. Many of the same neighbors attended. The same people who once called it worthless land. The same people who laughed when Maeve refused to sell. Now they listened. The environmental consultants presented their findings. The swamp carried ecological value, agricultural value, historical value. But what struck Bennett most was what happened afterward. Maeve stood, 80 years old, wearing the same worn coat, and spoke for herself. No lawyer. No son speaking in her place. No banker deciding for her. Just Maeve. She announced the creation of a family conservation trust. The swamp would remain protected. Responsible harvesting could continue. Research partnerships could continue, but ownership would stay with the family. The decision belonged to her, not Bennett, not Warren. Her. The room stayed quiet when she finished. Nobody laughed this time. Nobody questioned whether she understood her own affairs. Nobody called her confused. Her dignity had returned before their eyes, and everyone knew it. Later that evening, Bennett and Maeve walked into the swamp together. The sun hung low above the Iowa horizon. Golden light reflected across shallow water. The cattails moved gently in the breeze. The place felt different now, not because the swamp had changed, because Bennett had. He carried Elias's ledger beneath one arm. The old black and white notebook felt heavier than paper should. They stopped near one of the original marker stones. The same symbol from the survey, the same symbol from the missing pages, the same symbol his grandfather had left behind. Maeve looked across the wetland. He knew people would underestimate it. Elias? She nodded. He counted on it. Bennett smiled softly. For the first time he understood. His grandfather had never hidden treasure, never hidden a fortune. He had hidden patience, knowledge, a future that could survive hard times. Something valuable enough that greedy people would miss it because they were looking for something else. Bennett placed his hand on the ledger. The breeze stirred the pages slightly. He thought about Elias, about Thomas, about all the years he spent believing success meant leaving this place behind. The swamp had not been worthless. It had been a warning, a memory, a second chance, and somehow after all the damage, it had become a bridge back to his family. Maeve looked at him. The distance between them wasn't gone. Years could not disappear in a few weeks. Lost time remained lost. Pain remained pain. But something had shifted, something real. She reached out and rested her hand over his. Not forgiveness, not completely, not yet, but permission. Permission to stay, permission to try. For now, that was enough. They stood together as the last light faded across the water. Mother and son, not healed, not finished, but finally walking in the same direction. And if this story stayed with you, share your thoughts in the comments. And subscribe for more stories about truth, dignity, and the things people call worthless before they understand their value.